Hello, welcome to the J&B Talk F1 podcast. It's the week after the Hungarian Grand Prix, and the Formula One circus has now entered hiatus for the next 4 weeks until we reconvene the final weekend of August at the infamous Spa-Francorchamps in the Ardennes Forest. It was a chaotic afternoon on Sunday. That's all that can really be said. It was one of the races, if not for the season, in recent years. I don't think anyone's really got their head around the events quite yet. There was just so much to discuss, and really it went a long way to compensating for the criticisms which had been levelled at the sport throughout this season. And on the back of the British Grand Prix, apart from the sad news of Jules Bianchi's passing prior to Hungary, we've had two very good races to go into this now traditional month-long break. Amongst that very dramatic Grand Prix, we're also going to discuss the Singapore Grand Prix. It's had a little bit of an alteration, yet another one. Every few years there tends to be a tiny mod made to the circuit, and this one, it will be interesting to see how it affects the action. And we'll also look at the midterm review, being the midway point now. We'll look at obviously Mercedes' dominance continues unheralded, but we still have Ferrari, who have indeed turned around their fortunes now with Sebastian Vettel's victory on Sunday, making it 2 victories this season. We'll also look at other teams like Red Bull's plight with Renault, and then the other teams like McLaren, who have really struggled to get on the board until we did see that, of course, 5th place for Alonso on Sunday. Anyway, I'm Baden Westerweller, and I'm joined once again by Jawad. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Baden. As you said before, it was a bit of a chaotic race on Sunday, but we hope to decode everything for you on this edition.
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a bit to get through, it's fair to say. So we'll try our best to keep it as brief as we can while still enlightening those who are unfortunate to have missed this firecracker Sunday night race, as it were, or Sunday afternoon, depending where you're viewing from. But straight off the top, it was the week after the sad passing of Jules Bianchi, and it was Ferrari who ultimately saluted with Sebastian Vettel. And considering the Frenchman's connection to Ferrari with his academy ties, it really was quite a popular victory.
Yeah, and even at the end of the race when Vettel crossed the line and had a bit of an exchange on the radio with his team, he said, this one's for Jules, and who would have been with us on our team in the future. So it was a nice gesture to be had. And then also on the podium as well, all the drivers, Daniel Ricciardo and Danny Kvyat, for the first time on a Formula One podium, saluted their fallen comrade. So it was nice to see that gesture from everyone. And what better way to honour Bianchi's name than with, one of the best races we've seen in a while. Very, very close between everyone.
Oh, really? I don't know where you can start, to be honest. It just seemed to get more and more dramatic as each lap passed, and at the end of the day, came down to those final few laps, as we saw, with Daniel Ricciardo and Nico Rosberg, who didn't enjoy for a substantial part of the afternoon quite a solid haul of points that would have propelled him into the lead of the drivers' standings. Alas, he's coming together with the Australian with about 5 or 6 laps to go, saw him fall behind Hamilton, who himself endured a rotten afternoon, and he himself admitted that it just wasn't his day, or words to that effect. And ultimately, though, Hamilton's extended that lead by a few points, and that really was a bit of a chance gone begging for Rosberg. And you'll have to wonder down the track whether this was one of those flashpoint moments of his campaign that could make or break his desire for that first title.
Well, rotten luck for Rosberg, it has to be said, despite the fact that Hamilton had his fair share of incidents or hardships, as it were, during the race. The moment was there for Rosberg to capitalise, but in the end, the incident between Ricciardo and Rosberg was deemed a racing incident by the stewards. Rosberg, after the race, did rue the fact that he had the line going into turn 1. And Ricciardo came on from off the track to do the damage, but ultimately racing incident, and Rosberg will just have to move on, reset during the midterm break, and come back to Spa, the moment of the place where the two Mercedes guys had a bit of a moment last year, and see what he can do this time. But going back to the start of the race, that was really the moment where Mercedes lost it. You have to say, again, for the second race in a row, both cars had pretty tardy starts, it has to be said. This time it wasn't Williams who capitalised, it was Ferrari. Vettel got a clean getaway, and then Raikkonen at the same time was able to take Lewis going into turn, just after turn 2.
And what a
Before
start
we
this
know it,
was, though. We saw them nearly coming together, essentially, Vettel and Hamilton. It really looked quite hairy for a moment there before the dust settled and we saw the two reds ahead of the silver arrows.
yeah, it was pretty close, and same with when Raikkonen was making his pass to Hamilton and Rosberg too to take second, quite close, and that's what we want to see. Those kind of starts where it's not very processional, very unpredictable. But then again, later on that lap, Hamilton's plight was made even worse when he dropped a wheel on the dirt into the turn 6 and 7 chicane, and he blamed his teammates, saying that Rosberg didn't leave any room, but it was clear from the TV images that Rosberg had nothing to do with it. It was just Hamilton's fault. So by the end of the first lap, Hamilton is down in P12 outside of the points, and he's got it all to do as he did in last year's race.
Well, it must be said as well, Hamilton was at least man enough following the afternoon to admit that was his error on that first lap and seemed to own up. And really, as he did confess at the end of the day, it just was a rotten afternoon for him.
Exactly, but nevertheless, he'll be still grinning that he leads the World Championship by 20 points. If he had lost that lead in the championship at the end of that race, perhaps it would have been a different story in terms of what his reaction would have been. But nevertheless, he leads by 20 points now over Rosberg, who, as we said, missed out because of the run-in with Ricciardo. But some other good results there was quite a few good results for a lot of the drivers, as we touched on before, the Red Bulls getting on the podium for the first time, and their race wasn't without penalty either. Danny Kvyat had to take 10 seconds for overtaking Hamilton after the safety car came in, going off the track limits to overtake Hamilton. So he took 10 seconds, but still ended up finishing second to claim his first podium in Formula One. Ricciardo had to, lost time having to pit for a new front wing after his incident with Rosberg. And then Max Verstappen as well, if you look at it, finished fourth for Toro Rosso, which is a career best, and he too was with a penalty, which came as a result of a clash with Valtteri Bottas after the safety car restart. So it could be argued there that without the penalty that was applied, Verstappen could have had a shot at the podium, considering the plight that the Red Bulls found themselves in towards that latter part of the race. But nevertheless, a good result for the teenager.
Well, to that end, with Ricciardo coming together with Rosberg, you'd have to say the Australian was very much on course for quite a good portion following that safety car, not retention, when it went in, I guess, at lap 46, as it were. He really went on a charge, the Australian, and looked to a degree he might have emulated his efforts of 12 months ago, and ultimately that little coming together cruelled his charge, but it was still good to see him, obviously, with his close ties to Bianchi. He was able to retain that third position, even if it was by dint of Max's penalty.
Exactly, and Ricciardo actually had banked a set of soft tyres, new set of soft tyres from Saturday from qualifying. So that was able to, they were able to aid his charge before the incident with Rosberg, whilst everyone else were running the medium compound tyres. So that indeed helped him. We look further down the results. McLaren finished P5 and P9, so Fernando Alonso in 5th, Jenson Button in 9th.
P5, a long-suffering McLaren fan you've been in recent years. This must have been like Christmas come early for you.
For most people, it would be considering where they stand, but ultimately it's the victories they want. But considering the headlines on Saturday, the images of Alonso pushing his car into the pits, it was a rather, it really contrasted on Sunday when they were able to take the result. They kept themselves out of trouble. There was no reliability issues either. So once the reliability is sorted on the Honda side, they can start focusing on performance, and every race finish for them in the points is positive, but ultimately it's not where they want to be. It's the wins they want. So, but going back up the order a little bit, Kimi Räikkönen was running P2 for quite some time, as we said, but the bad luck continues, and an MGUK failure forced him to retire from the race.
Poor Kimi. It was me who suffered the bad luck, but I just went and had my Finlandia after, and it was all better.
It was all better, but I'm not. It'll be difficult to see whether it'll make his contract negotiations better. Not having the results to glean off like his teammate does, but nevertheless, he'll be moving to a couple of circuits after the break that he's really favoured. At Spa, one of them, then Monza, the home of Ferrari. So, but still, the second place was there for Raikkonen, but just, reliability on the car failed him. There was no points for Williams either in what was pretty much a bizarre race. Even though the race, as we said in the pre-show, is compared to Monaco in terms of layout, and that didn't really suit Williams that time. Williams thought that they would be better off here than they were in Monaco, but that didn't happen. Felipe Massa was outside of his grid box at the start, which forced the guys to do a second formation lap. There was an aborted start, and that gave him a 5-second penalty. Then Bottas having to change tyres again after having a puncture caused by Verstappen on the restart. That pretty much put him out of contention for the points. So no points for Williams on the day. Ferrari win, Red Bull double podium. So Williams looking looking under threat to challenge Ferrari, and looking threatened by Red Bull perhaps going into the second part of the season.
They're just not quite there, really. When you look at Austria and you look at Britain and then this weekend, they just aren't executing these fundamental components which make the difference between being a potential race victor and, to a lesser extent, regular podium getters as we see these weekends where they're just mired in the midfield, not even collecting the odd point or two. It's possibly to do with this whole customer engine component with the Mercedes. Until they do have that full backing and all the capital in place, they're just not quite that consistency which you need to see them really pulling off the victories, as we've seen now Ferrari. For all of that conjecture we only saw a week ago, there were a few calling for James Allison's head, unbelievably, despite the success at Malaysia and the relative upturn in form, even just with the few podiums compared to last season. And now suddenly Ferrari wins this weekend, and they're the ones suddenly back in the ascendancy in that best of the rest. And you do have to look quickly at the standings. Vettel's only 42 points behind Hamilton, 21 behind Rosberg. It's not like he's on another planet.
Oh, exactly. 42 points, as you alluded to, makes him an outside chance for the championship. A few more victories could do him good. But going back to James Allison, a few weeks ago, he was on the chopping board in terms of the press, but this weekend he was standing on top of the podium collecting the winning Constructors' Trophy. So it just shows you how fickle this business is, and if you're not winning, then you're on the way out. But suddenly when you do win, then you are the hero, as it were. But nevertheless, going on. Double retirement for Force India, like last year. This time it was a front wing failure for Nico Hülkenberg, which was rather dramatic. The wing just collected itself under the car and pretty much shattered into a million pieces, sending Hülkenberg into the wall at the runoff at turn 1. He was thankfully uninjured, but that's what caused the safety car, one and only safety car. And Sergio Perez tagged by the it has to be said, I don't know what adjective we can use to describe Pastor Maldonado this weekend. Yeah, don't know what kind of adjective we can use to describe Pastor Maldonado's racing this weekend, but it's not good.
Well, three penalties are a testament to that. Not only that, one of the penalties was inflicted in the course of serving what was his second penalty at that time.
Exactly. So he had a first he was given a penalty for tagging Perez, which was rather blatant. There was no evidence, no extra evidence needed there. Then he was given a drive-through penalty for speeding under the safety car. And as he was serving that drive-through for speeding under the safety car, he was caught speeding in the pit lane. So
That's
that was
simple
the
enough.
third. So that was the third penalty there, and it was pretty hilarious after the race watching the reaction on social media regarding this. And it's just, yeah, as we'll allude to later on in our midterm review part of this episode, where does this stop in terms of Maldonado? Lotus have a decent enough chassis to be scoring good points this season, but Maldonado, this stuff like this is just unacceptable.
Clearly, as long as those Venezuelan bolivars keep rolling in and he has the backing of the PDVSA oil giant, he's not going anywhere in a hurry unless something does change in that respect. And even if Lotus were to really man up and send him on his way, there's every chance there that he'll just take all of his investments somewhere else, say Force India. He's very much a man who's like a little cockroach in many senses. He just lingers, doesn't really achieve much, yet he's staying here year after year. And apart from, as I bring up many times, that incredulous victory, the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix, he's scored, I think, points maybe 5 or 6 times from getting close to 90 Grand Prix starts now, and he's 4.5 seasons on the grid. It's quite laughable, to be honest.
Yeah, very laughable is the only thing you can use word you can use to describe it, and it's hard. Yeah, as you said, 4.5 seasons he's almost been in F1, and considering the competitive car he had at Williams back in 2012, that more results weren't gleaned from that, and also this year the Lotus chassis is capable of scoring points regularly, but it just hasn't been there. Sure, the string of 5 DNFs he had at the start of the season in succession, sure, some of it was not exactly his fault, but then there were some occasions where it was of his own volition. So, yeah, big question mark over Maldonado, whether Lotus should keep him or not. And perhaps when we get to our silly season special next week, when the gloves come off and we become very tabloid-esque, we will perhaps discuss the future of Maldonado too. But anyway, to conclude our race review for Hungary, best race of the season, what do you think?
Oh no, I preferred Australia and China and Spain. They just took the cake by a mile. No, let's not kid ourselves. That race on Sunday, it'd really be hard pressed over the past few seasons to consider a better one, even amongst Canada 2014, the corresponding event at Budapest 12 months ago, and then even earlier in the year, Malaysia was good, and Britain, the race immediately preceding Hungary, was also a classic. But for mine, Sunday really takes the cake, and it's going to take a lot to top that one. But if we can get a repeat of these kind of races for the balance of this season, then we're in for some classic viewing.
Well, we are set for a revised starting procedure come the Belgian Grand Prix, where drivers won't be able to get the same assistance that they do currently in terms of setting their car up for the start of the race on Sunday. So perhaps, with the manual start set to kick in, could that show some more? Could that bring out some more? What is it? More unpredictable starts like we have seen in the past couple of races?
Yeah, well, Mercedes have already given us a bit of a taster of that past 2 events. They've been rather tardy, to put it mildly, and if this keeps up, then who knows, whoever's in the row 2, row 3 could stand to really capitalise on it, and from there it's going to be an interesting battle to see whether Mercedes in the thick of the action rather than just unperturbed, untroubled out the front, really strike problems as we saw on Sunday with Hamilton looking desperate to re-establish himself, and then even Rosberg tangling up with the lesser lights which Red Bull represents this season.
Exactly, and that's an interesting point you make too. That we've become so used to seeing Mercedes out the front and pulling away in clean air, but put them back into the pack, they struggle to overtake. Struggle to get up in to the dirty air of the other cars, and very
You've got
interesting to see.
Williams as well at Silverstone, you'd have to say if they hadn't have made that a blunder with strategy and not releasing Bottas earlier, and then in turn Bottas not making it stick when he was finally granted that approval, then Williams really could have won there as well. And we saw Ferrari, they had no qualms about letting Vettel race into the sunset, and Kimi was more than comfortable in that P2. So if teams execute it right, then I don't know if Mercedes will have it in them to reassume those leading positions, because Williams, that was the one that got away for them at Britain.
But then again, on one lap pace, the Mercedes is still pretty much the car to beat, and we're going to a couple of power circuits as they were anyway next in Spa and Monza, so you can expect the Mercedes to be quick there. But yeah, I have to say too, it was a very entertaining race, a lot going on, and just add in a bit of unpredictability, and that pretty much changes the whole equation. So we don't need any of these sort of gimmicks and whatnot to spice up the race. Just throw in a bit of unpredictability with the starts, and what we're going to see with the new starting procedures next race. Perhaps we could have some more of this.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think everyone is. If we get races to the caliber of Sunday, and with this added variable in the mix, then we can expect to see a lot more liveliness than we have in the past probably year and a half since this new hybrid era commenced.
Indeed. So let's move it on then.
Yes, Singapore, they've again made an alteration to the circuit, as they do rather sparingly, it must be said, every few years. But this one, again, it seems to have been met with the consensus being positive vibes. They've turn 11, to turn 13, essentially the entire approach of that has been altered. Where the Anderson Bridge is in that middle to back sector of the circuit, they've essentially tightened out an apex there on the run into that turn 13, which has resulted in the bridge, the Anderson Bridge. They're going to utilise the other opposite side of that as a two-way sort of carry bridge, and that will in turn also tighten up the apex and slow proceedings down even further into the turn 13 run-in. I don't know about you, Jawad, it's hard to see based on the tiny image that we've been provided, but I think this has the potential to really aid the racing we have seen at Singapore, which has generally been up to scratch since its inception in 2008.
Yeah, Singapore's another race of attrition. Pretty much, it's long. It's there's the whole endurance aspect with it, with the high temperatures and whatnot. So the new section looks pretty good on paper, but when we get there, ultimately that's when we'll find out what it does in terms of creating overtaking opportunities and whatnot. Was it 2 years ago, 2013, where they removed the infamous Singapore sling chicane? That was quite an annoying corner for most, but having that smoothed out was made it a lot more easier in that regard. Not that the track is hard already, just a little bit of leeway given there. And this one too, this change as well seems like it might create some better overtaking opportunities.
And you must say on that end too, this will probably be the next race that it's similar in nature to, of course, Monaco, but also Hungary. So this is really Red Bull's next opportunity, you would feel, if that Renault engine, which isn't the power unit, which isn't supposed to be upgraded until Russia, but if they can continue that form of Hungary, then this could be probably their last opportunity as well to get a possible victory on the board there, and for those other teams that really are deficient on the power circuits, as they're referred to, which we're going to see in vogue at Belgium and Italy.
Exactly, but also one variable that's added at Singapore is the heat. So perhaps if some of those unreliable engines could be victim to the high temperatures that are notorious in Singapore. So it'll be interesting come Singapore when we get there. Obviously in September, as always, it comes up.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll discuss it in more depth as we approach that weekend, but there's plenty to go on in between them. We've still got this entire month break, which is going to feel like an eternity, and I know we'll be chomping at the bit when it gets to that countdown to the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. It'll feel like an entirely new season's about to commence. But anyway, it is that midway point of the season. 10 rounds have been completed out of the 19 as it is now, with the loss of the German Grand Prix, and it's an appropriate time. At least today we'll glean over briefly each team's report card, and then in coming weeks we'll endeavour to provide with a more in-depth individual analysis of their fortunes. But I guess we start with Mercedes, and what more can you say? They've continued their almost unparalleled dominance from last season.
Pretty much, the Constructors' Championship is theirs. I don't think it's even theirs to lose this season. It's theirs done and dusted. With the amount of 1-2s that they've had this season, it's an interesting stat to see that both cars have finished on the podium at every single race, bar one, which was Hungary this season. So that's unparalleled level of dominance. And then in terms of the Drivers' Championship, it seems to be Lewis Hamilton's to lose as well. So it's sitting very much in their favour. They've had some moments this year that, as we've touched on earlier with the result in Hungary, where things haven't really gone their way. Malaysia being one of them, where they just genuinely didn't have the pace versus Ferrari. But otherwise, they have managed year two of this hybrid generation pretty well. Mercedes, it's just down to the teammate battle between Hamilton and Rosberg. When looking at the two individuals, Rosberg's advantage over Hamilton last year was the qualifying. Hamilton has gone and rectified that this year, and he currently stands 9 pole positions to Rosberg's 1. So it seems that Hamilton in all departments seems to be doing well. 5 victories to Hamilton to Rosberg's 3, with one of them arguably belonging to Hamilton. But now it's done and dusted. Rosberg won in Monaco. You can't say anything about that.
No, Rosberg as well, when you see those golden opportunities which seldom present themselves, and was speaking of a Lewis Hamilton caliber driver at Hungary, and he didn't capitalise, he would have been P2, potentially P3 if Ricciardo had have made that move stick. He probably would have been, 8 or to even 10 would have been. 6th place, 8 points, 3rd place, 15, 2nd, 18. He probably would have gained 8 to 10 points on Hamilton there, and ultimately he's ended up losing ground, and that's really the moment, the many moments across the season where Hamilton's the superior driver. He maximises obviously what was a rotten afternoon for him and still picked up a decent swag of points. Yeah,
well, when the opportunities present themselves, you have to capitalise, and unfortunately, although it wasn't Rosberg's fault what happened there, still, it's disappointing. You have to say that he didn't come out in the lead, but nevertheless, they're doing a good job from the front. There's not much more that can be said regarding them. So moving it on to who's sitting second in the Constructors' Championship at the moment, Ferrari. Now, Ferrari, they're the real story of the season, having turned things around from last year. They had to let go some of their staff, including team principals, the president, and a lot of their technical boffins as well. So we've got James Allison there in charge, Maurizio Riverbeni as the team principal, Sebastian Vettel has injected new life into the team as well. And the result of that, they've had 2 victories so far, which was their target for the whole season, to achieve 2 victories, and 6 podiums as well. 5 to Sebastian Vettel, 1 to Kimi Räikkönen. Question is, will there be more to come in the second half? Potentially, yes.
going on Hungary and even Silverstone, really, you'd have to think that as long as they can keep up their development to a reasonable extent without compromising their 2016 Challenger's progress, then I reckon there's a good chance we might even see at least one more victory before this season's over. And really, for someone like Kimi Räikkönen, he's due a bit of fortune as well, so I wouldn't be counting against seeing him give a victory another shake at some point. And as for Vettel, he's fit into this establishment at the Maranello culture very cleanly, and couldn't really have asked for a better fit when you look at it. Almost more so they're made for each other than Fernando Alonso ever was.
Pretty much. It's for some people it might invoke that image of Michael Schumacher when he first started off at Ferrari all those years ago, and perhaps this is the same. This is the same thing. Vettel has injected new life into the team. He's still young. He's already tasted success in the form of 4 world championships, but ultimately his goal is to do more, and he's probably the most perfect driver out there to lead Ferrari back to the front. So far they've done a good job, I guess. Out of all the teams, they've been the most improved since last year.
Yeah, you'd have to say so. Looking at all the other outfits, I mean, Red Bull has regressed. McLaren's had their hellish campaign, their return to the Honda days of 2 decades ago, and then amongst the others who are pretty much have been holding station. We do look at the next team in Williams. They haven't exactly fallen backwards. They've more or less stagnated, and they're obviously still competitive. They've picked up several podiums now, but as we did allude to, that one realistic opportunity for that victory at Silverstone, they didn't capitalise on it. And I don't know, Ferrari, they've got a solid advantage at the moment in the constructors, and they'd be hard pressed to really make any more inroads before the season's out. But on account of their lower budget, they're doing all they can, really, and without, as I alluded to earlier as well, that factory power unit support, they're always going to have one arm tied behind their back.
Oh, exactly. And also coupled together with a significantly lesser budget than Ferrari, for example, Williams do have a task ahead of them, and there's also much conjecture at the moment regarding the future of Valtteri Bottas in the team, whether that's going to be a distraction as far as the rest of the season goes. We have to wait and see, but Spa and Monza should present some good opportunities for Williams as well. Hungary, we saw what happened there, no points to them, but they're still very much in the hunt to challenge Ferrari for second in the Constructors' Championship. As we saw last season, most of their success came in the second half of the championship, where they scored plenty of podiums, with Felipe Massa getting in on the action too. So, yeah, watch this space regarding Williams.
And yes, we'll see whether Bottas is retained or he's on the move to Ferrari. But as it stands, there's a compelling case as well for other drivers to fill that seat if Kimi does get moved on. But you would have to say the cooling in this intense speculation, as it were, a few weeks ago, that the Finn was to replace his compatriot at Maranello, it really has gone quiet on that front. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see Valtteri return for a fourth campaign, as it would be at the Grove squad in 2016.
Exactly, and we're going to talk more about the contract situations and a silly season, as it were, next week. But yeah, there hasn't been much word regarding that in the past week, so who knows what will happen there. But moving on now to Red Bull Racing, who their season has pretty much been manifested in the problems on the Renault side and not having a competitive engine. A lot of the dramas have occurred for Red Bull and Renault off the track, with exchanges of words, threats to pull out of the sport and whatnot. But Hungary, I guess, would really be a sigh of relief for everyone in both those camps. to see, both Red Bulls finish on the podium and then also the Renault-powered Toro Rosso finish fourth as well. It would have been a big sigh of relief to everyone for sure. And is Hungary a one-off? We have to say, and as you were saying before, with Singapore, that could be the next opportunity for the Red Bull team to target a podium.
Absolutely. They're going to struggle, as they have done on the power circuits, to achieve much more than potentially scraping a top 5 position. We've seen them really have these races as we did at Austria, where they were languishing really and fighting with the Renault power unit, which has caused them so much grief this season. Daniel Ricciardo indeed is now perilously close to necessitating yet another power unit, and with that yet another penalty sanction. So he's clearly going to feel some more pain in coming events. But Red Bull really, I don't know, I can't see where another potential podium or even victory will come other than the alluded to Singapore Grand Prix. And Daniel Kvyat, he had a slow start and he got the hurry up from Dr. Marco at the, was it pre or post Spain? But ever since then, he's really lifted his game to another level, and that culminated in a well-deserved second place at Hungary last weekend.
Yeah, very well done for Kvyat as well. Coming into the season prior to these problems that Red Bull showed, we thought that Red Bull would pretty much be where they were last season, and that would have meant, regular podiums for Ricciardo and even Kvyat. But it's taken this long for him to get that maiden podium, and the hope would be for him to continue. Hopefully, it's not like he's an untalented driver. It's a driver that boasts a lot of talent, which was spotted by Red Bull last season when they took the decision to replace Sebastian Vettel, the departing Sebastian Vettel, with him. So watch this space regarding them. I'm sure their attention will be on to 2016 as far as challenging for a full season goes, but there could be some good results to be had for the Red Bull in the remaining races.
And indeed, one final note on Red Bull, there's been a lot of conjecture about the future of their relationship with Renault, and there have been meetings to that end with the Viry-Châtillon marque in the previous 24 hours, and the outcome of that is essentially they're still deliberating what their future will be beyond 2016, whether they will continue in the sport, continue as an engine supplier, or go back to their factory status by reacquiring the Enstone operation now known as Lotus. But Red Bull are even suggesting now that they could be taking on a power unit supply from, who would have believed it, Mercedes for 2016. So also we'll be watching this space in the second portion of the campaign, whether this relationship, this marriage, which yielded so much success in the late 2000s and, of course, through till 2013 with 4 consecutive titles, whether that does come to a shuddering halt.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with them going into the future. Certainly there's a lot of people who don't want to see the Red Bull, or, in fact, Milton Keynes, as it were, to go, pull out of the sport. But yeah, when things aren't going right, then fingers have to be pointed, it seems. But going back to what you were saying about Renault, there could be plans altogether to leave Formula One and perhaps focus more on their efforts in Formula E. So that's something else. That Renault have alluded to, perhaps. But moving it on now to Force India. Force India just debuted their B-Spec car at the British Grand Prix, and they're hoping to glean some more points in the second half of the season. It's nice to see that a small team like them have trying to do some innovations, especially with that front wing with the gill design on the nose. Very unique, and it's nice to see a small team try those sort of innovations, but they'll certainly be scratching their heads over what happened in Hungary. There was a suspension failure for Sergio Perez during practice, which saw him spectacularly flip the car, and Nico Hulkenberg, as we alluded to earlier, with that front wing failure during the race. So, but still, they have the potential in that car to be picking up points regularly in the second half.
It was a slow start to the campaign for them. There was all those delays in the pre-season, and then eventually they did turn up to Barcelona with a 2014 spec car, essentially just running the new liveries. But they obviously endured a bit of a wanting little time there between Malaysia and the European season, really getting into the heart of that. And since Britain, when they introduced this new guild front wing, they've turned a corner quite nicely. And but yeah, Hungary was a bit of a worrying moment for them. They had a few issues throughout the weekend, not least the collisions with Perez and Maldonado, and of course his flip on Friday, and then the Sunday, the scary moment where, yeah, the 1,000 splinters, which resulted from Hulkenberg's front wing. It will leave them a few questions to be answered over this break, but nevertheless, that they're a solid force, which their name suggests, but they're always there or thereabouts.
Yeah, exactly, and they've got two very capable drivers to do that, and they could be very well challenging Red Bull for the points-paying positions and Toro Rosso come that part. But going on to Lotus now, as we were discussing earlier, they have a pretty sound chassis in the E23 hybrid. They've got the Mercedes engine in the back of it this year, but the results, haven't really shown that the car is good, and we put most of it onto Pastor Maldonado, it seems. 40%, I guess I'd say he's had bad luck, not of his own volition, but then 60% of the incidents has to be of his own accord. And what do we say then? Grosjean trying to, doing the best job he can. I think the only moment I'd criticise Grosjean for was in Canada when he was running fifth, and then he had that run-in with Will Stevens on the back straight, which saw him have to take a penalty for it. So that's probably the only hiccup Grosjean's had. But as far as that, he's trying to get the maximum out of this car. But they could still go for a bit better.
Yes, well, it's their first season, is it, with the Mercedes power? So they hope to obviously make the inroads there with a better chassis that they've had this season. But nevertheless, they've really fallen short quite a few times through one issue or another. But Grosjean, you can't fault him for his efforts. But yeah, Maldonado, as we did mention earlier on, he just seems to find a way to dirty his nose every single weekend, and you have to wonder whether they can afford to keep this up any longer. We've seen Jolyon Palmer replace Grosjean at most weekends on the Friday in that initial practice running, which has left the Frenchman quite disgruntled, and perhaps this is costing him that extra 5% on a Sunday when he hasn't got the quite the intimate, detailed knowledge of the circuit. But beyond that, yeah, clearly it's an improvement, but nevertheless, they've still got a long way to come next season, and who knows whether it will be under the Lotus or once more under the Renault moniker.
Exactly, and as you said, Jolyon Palmer essentially knocking on the door, if you will, of the Lotus team, perhaps to come in and replace one of the two drivers next season. But we'll allude to that more, of course, in the silly season special next week, whether what will happen in that regard. But yeah, Sauber, up to Sauber now, and we have to say that the car that they have at the moment is essentially the same one that they had in Melbourne when they scored 2 points. That's why they've fallen behind the rest in terms of progress. Let's not forget their efforts in round 1 of the championship following that controversial start to the season with Guido van der Garde and his contract issues. 5th for Felipe Nasser on debut and 8th for Marcus Ericsson. Good results there, but since then their scoring run has been pretty dry.
Yeah, we've really not seen too much of them throughout this campaign. Obviously, they've got a decent-looking car this year. It's visually striking with those IKEA colours, as you could describe it. But for the relative talent that we do see behind the wheel there, Felipe Nasser and Marcus Ericsson, they just yeah, they've really been languishing around that P or Q2, Q3 drop-off zone for the balance of this season to date, and they picked up that solitary point on Sunday afternoon at Hungary, courtesy of Ericsson, and we did hear as well in the lead-up to the final Grand Prix before the break that both the incumbents have been renewed for the 2016 season, which is one good sign. It means they can go into this back half of the campaign knowing that they're going to have a drive for next season and really work towards that goal of improvements with a potential increased capital wherever it can come from for 2016.
Exactly, so they can focus on that, and the only thing you can say is let them down this season has been the development, falling behind the rest, but whether it's going to come next year or perhaps in the latter part of this year, they've got some handy operators behind the wheel, and they just need to put it together. One thing that will give Sauber on this occasion is the fact that their package has been quite reliable. They showed that in pre-season testing when they completed hundreds upon hundreds of laps in the pre-season tests. But yeah, that's one thing that Sauber haven't really had a problem with. But that is indeed a problem that their rivals Toro Rosso have, especially on the Renault side of things. But other than that, Max Verstappen actually says that they have the second best chassis on the grid. So what do you make of that comment?
It's hard not to concur with him, honestly. When we've seen their pace on Fridays, at the very least, they've been regular runners in the top 5 there, and obviously with 2 young chargers in, Max and Carlos Sainz, they're going to have these little inconsistencies throughout the way where they might come together with some of the other drivers, but nevertheless, when they have had the chance to put their best foot forward, they've made the most of it, and clearly there's a bright future for the pair. And apart from Max at Monaco when he had that hair-raising moment with Grosjean into Turn 1, he's really acquitted himself very well for a 17-year-old, but it must be said as well, this conjecture of him being underage, essentially, it's overshadowed Carlos Sainz, who is really he's done a fine job this season. Yeah, just hasn't had the same attention there as his underage 17-year-old, soon to be 18-year-old teammate in Max Verstappen.
Yeah, both guys are doing a good job. Sainz has had the upper hand in qualifying over his teammate, but both have shown that they've got strong intellect. They've got the maturity as well to be racing with guys like Alonso or Hulkenberg, for example. We saw Verstappen on several occasions pull off some spectacular overtakes, which were really, really pleasing to the eye, and a lot of people were raving about it. But unfortunately, it's just the reliability that has curtailed their progress. And we said earlier that a podium potentially was on the cards for Verstappen in Hungary, and that would have been something, break all the records. 17-year-old on the Formula One podium.
Nevertheless, we saw, obviously, for the Red Bull conglomerate empire as it was, there was a triumvirate of them from P2 to P4, which as a whole for the operation would have been pleasing regardless of the order in which it did come home. We saw as well Danny Kvyat only being 20 years old. He's also young enough, and imagine had we had a Max up there too, it would have been quite the youthful podium surrounding the ex-alumni in Sebastian Vettel, who delivered the energy drinks giant so much through, of course, that infamous first victory at Monza in 2008, and of course all of his successes throughout his 6-year tenure at the senior outfit. But really, look at both of them. The back half of the season they're going to develop a whole lot more, and into 2016, notwithstanding all the conjecture about where their future may be, whether they'll be bought out by someone or what'll go on with a Red Bull itself, whether they're going to pull out and leave them to go it alone. But both of them are going to go well beyond any kind of tie-up to Red Bull. They've clearly got teams have got their eyes on both of them. And yeah, we have seen already, Max, you've had lots of rumours coming suggesting that he might have a future at Ferrari or Mercedes or even Williams, and Carlos Sainz too would be in a similar boat.
Very well. So moving on to McLaren now, and could it be said that this season is more or less a glorified test campaign, or are they actually wanting to get some results?
I might leave this one mostly to you, Jawad, as an aggrieved Woking supporter. I'm sure that you're most
Oh,
well
secret,
trained
secret
on
Woking
the
supporter.
hardships.
You know, in our business, we're not allowed to be fans, but yeah, secret Woking supporter, and yeah, the unreliability that they've shown is warranted, but not to the extent that has been shown so far by the team. You would have thought that after a few races into the season, they would have had enough miles on the power units to be able to run them consistently and try and get some performance out of it. But we're halfway through the season, and still, there's little electrical niggles that are starting to show up and whatnot, and you'd hope that in the second half of the season they can start to try and extract some performance out of the Honda unit and get some of that latent power out of it as well. But nevertheless, it's been a tough old campaign. The drivers know it, despite the ongoing conjecture about their future. Button in recent times has been linked to perhaps going over to Williams. Even Alonso saying that he's disenchanted with F1 at the moment and could be looking at potentially moving to another category altogether. But putting all those things aside, McLaren will have a lot of work to do in terms of trying to extract the power out of their engine. We still haven't seen them run the engine at full wick as yet without running into problems, so it'll be interesting to see where they sit in terms of pace to everyone else when they have that engine at 100%.
Yep, slow but steady from the player. When they get these seldom opportunities to capitalise, regardless of the high attrition rate, which we did see at Hungary, they clearly had their best effort for the season regardless there. And if that's to be the high point of their initial campaign in this reuniting with Honda, then I guess they've just got to focus on better days next season. If that's the goal, clearly, then put all resources towards that and just take what they can for the balance of this campaign, which really has been dogged from that initial post-season test at Abu Dhabi last year, when the consensus was quite worryingly ominous there that they were going to have their backs against the wall for this season.
Yeah, pretty much, but some opportunities may come up in the latter part of the season, but as we've mentioned a couple of times now, they're heading off to two power circuits in Spa and Monza. Spa, they're going to bring some upgrades on the Honda engine with some tokens being used, so perhaps some performance can be gleaned from that, but otherwise, yeah, very tough season so far for McLaren and Honda. A lot of the unreliability they've had is embarrassing in terms of, these issues should have been ironed out earlier on, but nevertheless, we're on to our final team now in Mana Marussia, and what more can we say that it's just a relief to see them on the grid, considering where they were following the Russian Grand Prix last year.
Yes, Russia and everything which occurred at Suzuka, culminating in the sad events of not even a fortnight ago when Jules Bianchi ultimately lost his brave fight. Clearly they were really on an emotional roller coaster throughout this period, and who knows what they could be experiencing at this time, but hopefully they can now move on with the recent events and have a bit of a springboard. We've seen that 2015 car, which is yet to make its presence felt at any of the events, but for next season beyond, yeah, they could make some inroads, but as you did say, it was just a miracle in the first place to see them on the grid following the off-season where they were essentially in liquidation. They lost their facilities and most of the components.
Yeah, exactly, and now they're on the rebuild this season. It might not be that we'll see the 2015 car at all this year, as has been alluded to by team principal John Booth. But yeah, as they accumulate more sponsors and get the finances into place, perhaps we'll see them come with a new car in 2016 and that might be what it is for Mana Marussia at the moment. Both drivers are doing a good job in terms of keeping out of trouble. I think they've probably had a pretty reliable car as well as far as that goes. The teammate battle is pretty even Stevens, I'd have to say, between Roberto Meri and Will Stevens. Will Stevens has had the upper hand when it comes to the qualifying. 5-4, I think it is, in his favour, and then 5-4 to Roberto Meri's favour in the races. So as long as they keep their head out of trouble, they can just get along with what they're doing and get that data and everything in place for 2016. But yeah, good to see them back on the grid and just stay out of the financial troubles.
Absolutely, it's good to have as many outfits on the grid as we can. We see Haas coming in next season. Clearly, they've got brighter prospects with this close collaboration with Ferrari, so it doesn't appear as though they're going to be losing their moniker as the ones, the minnows as they call it, bringing up the rear of the grid. But who knows, if they can really work hard and get some investment coming in, they could just finally make that next step up the grid.
Exactly, and start getting into the points regularly, as it were. But that pretty much wraps up our midterm review. But you can also find the article that I've written regarding the midterm review. I'll put the link in the description below, so be sure to check that out for a more detailed version of what we've discussed. But other than that, Baden, it's going to be difficult 3 weeks without any racing.
Yeah, as we've mentioned many times, now we're going to be a bit stir-crazy by the conclusion of this little 3 or 4 week hiatus. We're going to have to get quite creative and, as we did say, go a bit tabloid, outlandish, silly season mode, just get a bit sensationalist there and come up with all sorts of different propositions just to keep all of you fans interested during this little convalescence, which is... Yeah, we're used to it now after 3 or 4 years of a month-long break, but it's not going to be the case as of next season with the calendar indeed compressed. So it's the last time we will have to endure such a lull in the action, which really at least gives something to talk about in between each fortnight when the races are normally spaced out. But yeah, stand by each week. We're going to have a different theme for it, starting with the silly season notion. Then we do hope to go on to a more humorous tangent in subsequent weeks.
Exactly, and we are, busy rehearsing for those specials. So be sure to tune in. And what more can we say then for this one?
Yes, until Belgium, but we will be back each week, so don't worry too much. Your loyal Australian fans will see that the fanatics here will continue to bring you what we can.
Indeed, and just a final quick shout out as well to the Australian team tonight ahead of the third Ashes test over in England. So at Edgbaston too. So who can forget 10 years ago the test that played out at Edgbaston? So we look forward to it.
Yeah, at least that'll be on in this intervening period. The series will almost be at its end by the time the Formula One paddock reconvenes for Belgium. So to some degree, for those of us who share that motorsport and cricketing passion, that'll be something to keep the mind occupied in the meantime.
All right, yeah, pretty much. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Until then.